Why? Oh, there's
Alan, unplug and replug it in. Sound.
Good morning. I'm Sylvia Bianchi. I'm the Executive Director for the Culver City Downtown Business Association. Thank you all for coming. I would like to introduce Ken Kaufman. He's going to be our moderator today. Ken is a DBA board member. He also is the owner of Rush Street and City Tavern. And he has a lot of experience in interviewing our candidates over the years. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Sylvia. As you guys know, this is a DBA-sponsored event. The DBA is not a political organization. We don't endorse anybody. So this is purely informational and for the understanding of our members what each of you represent as you run for the council. So why don't you each take a minute. Sylvia will be on my timer here. And each take a minute to talk about why you're running, who you are, etc. Start on this side, Mr. Fish.
Good morning. My name is Hardin Alexander Fish. It's my great confession. But so that's all here on the ballot that I've been. You can't make it through middle school with a name like that. I've been Alex Fish for forever. So I am the Culver City chair, the chair of the Culver City Committee on Homelessness. With that experience, we've taken policies that this county sort of laid out in broad brush strokes, and we've made them reality right here in Culver City, including a rapid rehousing program that's being developed right now, and a program to keep families in their homes and help seniors with life safety grants so that they can stay in their homes safely. I've also been an active member civically with the last campaign, including the campaign against Measure CA, which was a very technical measure involving police and fire department. I am an attorney. I work for the California Department of Justice doing environmental enforcement work. I've been doing that for about 3.5, 4 years. Before that, I was in private practice working very long hours to afford a home in Culver City. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Daniel?
Good morning. My name is Daniel Lee. I'm a resident of Culver City. For the last 14 years, I've tried to contribute to the city as much as I could along the lines of which really appeals to me and my soul. For the last 14 years, I've at Elcon Elementary as a mentor in the Young Storytellers program. For the last 7 years, I've been on the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee, and in that time, I've been a chair of that committee. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and the California Air National Guard. My current job is I work at the James Lawson Institute, which means I work with Reverend James Lawson, who's a civil rights legend, great advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., and strategist for things like the integration campaigns in Nashville, the Montgomery bus boycott in Montgomery, and the Freedom Rides. I work as a project manager. We put on a number of different events around the country. My technical background, Trojan and a Bruin. I have a degree in film from USC, and my MSW is from UCLA. I'm very interested in contributing to the council in a way that is different than what many politicians usually bring to the table. It's not a secret that I come from an activist and background. I'm also technically a social worker. So I bring a lot of empathy to my policy positions and my policy decisions. And I think as a city of kindness, that is something that should be welcome in Culver City, and I'm looking forward to doing that going forward.
Thank you, Dan. Marcus?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcus Tiggs. I've lived in Culver City for 26 years. I am a practicing bankruptcy lawyer representing business owners, individuals, creditors, creditor committees, trustees. Way prior to that, I'm a veteran, retired lieutenant colonel, United States Army. My activity in this city started approximately 17 years ago. Though we lived here in Culver City for 26 years, 17 years ago, I decided I needed to become active in the city that I live. I began as a planning commissioner. I was on the planning commission for 8 years. I was the chair. One of the things that really touched my heart, we provided entitlements to Upward Bound House, as well as another organization in West Washington that provides good things for residents in our city. In addition to that, I've been on the Fiesta La Bayona committee for about 14 years. I was the chair 2 years in a row. The Fiesta is a fantastic event. It brings people from diverse backgrounds together, and it allows us to talk, to exchange ideas in a very relaxed atmosphere in our park. In addition to that, I'm on the Centennial Celebration Committee. I was the time capsule subcommittee chair, and on top of that, I'm also on the Citizens Oversight School Bond Committee. With that committee, we're making sure that the monies that are allocated are used according to what the voters have decided. Why am I running? This is the second time running. I'm running because I want to make a difference. I think I've made a difference in various committees that I've mentioned, but now I want to make a difference for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I forgot to announce that Albert Barrett is not able to attend today because he's ill, but Jeff Cooper, our mayor, has a statement that he'd like to read from him.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. Albert apologizes that he can't be here today. Obviously, he's, if anybody's seen him on any of the forums on television, he's been slightly, well, probably more than slightly under the weather, so he wouldn't do anybody any good by being here this morning. So apologies to all of you, apologies to his fellow candidates. But he wanted me to read this statement. Good morning. I'd like to thank the Downtown Business Association for hosting this event and inviting us all to attend. In just 2 minutes, it's hard to tell all of you the reasons I'm running for City Council and why I hope I can earn your endorsement and your vote. But the most important reason I'm running is because I believe our city is at a critical crossroads. We live in an incredible place where cutting-edge technology companies are moving in, where we have quiet, tree-lined streets, where we are all proud of our top-notch schools. But because Culver City is such a desirable place to be, we are beginning to feel the stress of living in such an in-demand city. We need to make sure that development is done correctly, protecting our small town atmosphere, while providing us with an economic climate that generates revenues to pay for the level of police, fire, and municipal services Culver City residents expect. We need to do all this without constantly coming to our residents to increase taxes. I also believe we need to work harder to make sure that we can provide opportunities for everyone in our community. To me, that means enhancing our recreational offerings and making them accessible to the elderly and the disabled. That means pushing developers to create new green space in our community because our children deserve the finest park systems we can provide. I believe our police and fire personnel, our first responders, should have all the tools and resources they need to make our community safe. We need leaders who are willing to think out of the box to generate new revenue streams instead of simply increasing taxes. We need leaders who know what it takes to attract and retain businesses. We need leaders who can safeguard our financial resources and use them wisely. I believe I have the experience, financial knowledge, and innovative thinking that will serve our city well as Culver City moves into the future. I hope to share with you today, obviously not today, but I think I can make Culver City an even better place to live, work, and play. Thank you. Appreciate the moments.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd like to talk specifically about the downtown area, because we are the Downtown Business Association. And that's the area from the Kirk Douglas Theater, essentially to Queso, downtown. I'd like you all to comment on what you think specifically about downtown. What's our biggest problem? Put yourself in the mind of a business owner downtown and say, what do you think is the biggest problem we're facing and how would you solve it? We'll start with you, Mr. Tiggs.
Okay. The biggest problem in my mind, not a business owner, but living in Culver City for a long time, if I was a business owner, it would be traffic and it would be parking. as far as how would I solve these issues, we'll start with parking. Realistically, I don't see another parking structure being built. It's possible. So until one is built, if one ever is, we probably need to leverage private-public partnerships as far as sharing parking. In addition, we need to think outside of the box. There's technology that's being used in West Hollywood and Westwood that essentially has sensors in the parking areas where a driver can use an app to determine, where a spot is available versus that driver going around in circles and serpentines, etc. As far as traffic, I was a planning commissioner for 8 years, so I've seen 75 plus traffic reports, or traffic studies rather. Usually the knee-jerk reaction is, if there's a lot of money available to mitigate the traffic, it's going to be synchronization of the traffic signals, or maybe a signal, but usually it's extending a turn pocket, restriping, things of that nature. Those are really, they're mitigation, but at the end of the day, the driver doesn't see much of a difference. It doesn't help a business if a driver is driving around and around and they can't find a spot. They're going somewhere else. So with traffic, let's look at some low-tech stuff. Traffic control officer. Why don't we consider using traffic control officers during peak times at key intersections? If it's an economic thing, we have numerous projects that are being built. Let's leverage those developers to commit some money for our mobility fund, which would include traffic control officers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, what do you think our biggest problems are?
So for downtown in particular, as someone who is a pedestrian and a walker, I will partially agree with Marcus wholeheartedly that one of the biggest issues facing downtown is traffic. But I think that issue sort of, there's an interplay between that issue and the rapid development that's been happening downtown in general. So I think those two issues need to be taken together. And I think I've spoken about a number of times trying to come up with something akin to a development timeline, so we know where the concentration of active construction is happening at the time, and if we can as a city pace out that development, work with the developers of course, to make it so not all of these projects are happening at the same time and impacting us at the same time, I think that would be something that I would put into my long-term vision. In the short term, I think there needs to be a more stable connection from the downtown Culver City area to mobile transit and the Culver City station. I think there's a large desire and there's a large move towards mobility, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure in general, but very much being asked for by both businesses and residents in Culver City. I think if we had a better connection, and I think it's hard because this is going to be something that has to happen after Ivy Station is done. We see how things are in reality, not just in their blueprints and their markups, but we need to have a concrete way to connect Ivy Station, the Culver City Metro Station, to downtown, because the Expo line is the most successful line within the fleet of the MTA, the Los Angeles MTA. It's one of the most road lines. It's hit its targets for ridership for 2020. I think it hit those last year. So there's a lot of possibility of people coming both from the west side and from downtown to Culver City, but how do they get to downtown? And I think that's a big issue that could help us alleviate a bit of the traffic, but more importantly, get those people from these mass transit areas into downtown. And I think we need better connections in terms of walkability, things that people can do on their way from the metro station into downtown, but also pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure so people feel safe taking their bike from the metro into downtown Culver City. And I think bike share will do a lot to alleviate that, because if you are a biker, you know that the bike terminals at the metro station are often full, and you can't store your bike there. You have to take it with you. So we need to do things to get the people who walk and bike into downtown, and I think that will alleviate some of our concerns in terms of traffic, because as Marcus said, even if we wanted to build another parking structure, which I am not necessarily convinced is the answer, that would still bring more cars into downtown.
Thank you.
And
Good.
increase traffic.
I've been a homeowner here for 13 years in the walk shed of the downtown area, and part of the reason that we chose Culver, we could have lived anywhere, and my wife and I could have chosen anywhere at the time I was, in a different circumstance. We chose Culver City in part because of the potential of downtown at that time. The bones here are the bones of a streetcar suburb. They're walkable. It's pleasant. You have all the desirable things built into the DNA of the downtown area that we wanted. So the short answer is parking, but the long-term answer is taking advantage of that streetcar suburb past. In terms of parking, I think there's a desperate need for an overall parking management plan, because at the moment it seems sort of segmented how visitors use parking versus businesses use. There are competing demands for the parking spaces that are available. I think if there was more coordination, that everybody's needs could be met. Short-term parking, pricing the on-street parking correctly so that nobody's circling. There should always be one space available or two spaces available per block. This is Donald Shoup stuff. Off-street parking should be priced appropriately so that people are able to get here, but people also know that they'll be able to park. The traffic is, it's an inevitable part of the street design, and we are reaching the limits regionally of our car present. There are traffic demand strategies and things we can do to make it better, but I don't think it's responsible to plan on the hopes that autonomous cars are going to save our problems. If we'd been planning for rocket packs in the 50s, we wouldn't have made much progress. But I do think that there's an opportunity now in the long term, particularly with the general plan update. We're going to be doing a once in 2 generations update, soup to nuts of the whole blueprint for the city, from traffic to open space to housing to business, the different land uses. I think there's a wonderful opportunity with the success of the Expo line, which has the most ridership per mile of any line. And it's right here. It's right. The county has invested $1.5 billion in getting people to, through, and from Culver City. We need to get them to stay here and visit your businesses. We need to make it. We need to create a linear city that's really from Washington all the way through the Kirk Douglas and beyond, as we see more improvements there, and perhaps expanding your bid is an opportunity there. But we need to make sure that the growth in visitors is coming from walking, bicycling, scooting, local, safe options to get to and from other places where people are.
Well, we all agree that traffic and parking are the 2 biggest problems. I think we can all agree with that. So let's sort of drill down a little bit about parking. And let's not talk about long-term solutions, but rather some short-term solutions that you may have. One of the big problems for businesses is employee parking, which never seems to be something that the city ever considers. That as we build more restaurants, we have more people here visiting, we have more employees as well. This impacts the residents, because what happens is employees end up in residential areas parking. So can you think of, or can you help, other municipalities have dealt with employee parking? I don't believe Culver City ever has. Do you have any ideas? We'll start with you, Daniel. Do you have any ideas on employee parking?
Sure. I gotta admit, this isn't an issue that I've thought a lot about, except in the context of trying to protect neighborhoods where there is permanent parking from a resident POV. But I think it's important to talk about it from a business owner POV and from an employee POV. I think to some degree, the businesses that we have in Culver City obviously bring in a lot of money and tax revenue to the city. I think there should be some argument, say if we were to build another parking structure, or if we were to reevaluate the parking structures that we currently have, I think there could be some type of outlay to designate a certain percentage of those spaces for employees. I think it would not be unreasonable to designate the spaces, for instance, at the top of the structure, which might not be the most desirable for customers, but which would be spaces that someone who's going to be there for a longer length of time might not be as aggrieved having to use. I think there could be an argument towards specifically designating areas in terms of our current parking structures for employees, and then I would be very open to hearing other suggestions from business leaders about how to alleviate the employee parking issue, but I admit it's something that I don't have a lot of concrete ideas for at this moment.
Alex?
I've certainly heard about employee parking from the residents, especially on Duquesne. So it is, parking is a question of competing interests, and we have to strike the right balance. I think that the most important single step that we can take is to make sure that the city is serving business owners, and make sure that there's a single point of contact that's responsive and understands parking utilization right now, where the opportunities are, where there's some slack, so that we're actually able to utilize all of the parking assets from City Hall to private lots that are perhaps underutilized, like the roof of the complex across Venice. And to make it possible, I think there's an opportunity there for transit alternatives to think about the needs of your employees coming to and from business. That's something I really think that sort of a meeting, a conference, a coming together between city staff and the DBA and other interested parties about managing the parking would go a long way.
Thank you. Marcus?
Everything starts with communication. You bring up this issue, and I've thought about it, but I haven't drilled down that deep. But just thinking, what's the total number of employees that drive? We have to assess that first. How many are we dealing with? Are we dealing with 100? Are we dealing with 500? Once the city figures that out in conjunction with the DBA, then we start looking at where can we provide parking, or where can we have a public-private partnership to deal with this. Until we know the numbers, it's hard to come up with a solution. If the number is 100, that's probably really easy. If the number is 500, we have a huge challenge. Every employee working for one of your businesses does not drive. I think we know that. Some are taking the expo, some are taking the bus. So I would say we start with assessing how many we're dealing with, and then we get together and communicate. Because these issues, and we have so many issues, but they're not in isolation. They're interconnected. They're interconnected. So City Hall has to talk to DBA, DBA has to talk to City Hall, and then if we put our heads together, we're going to come up with something. It might not be perfect, but at least we're moving towards a direction of resolving an issue.
Thank you. I think the traffic problem, my view, is that it is more of a macro problem. Obviously, the whole west side is a mess, and getting from west to east after 2 o'clock in the afternoon is very difficult. And a lot of the traffic that goes through Culver City is not related to Culver City. It has to do with people getting from west to east. Are there any potential solutions to solve that for the downtown area in terms of routing or any other solutions you might have? Because traffic is a major problem. And if not, we'll move on to another question. All right, it's insoluble. Daniel, go ahead.
I think it's obvious by the hesitation that none of us have those solutions.
Yeah.
But I think in general, a lot of our traffic policy has been focused on what you said, getting people through Culver City instead of having people see this as a destination. I think when we talk about traffic calming and traffic easing, we mostly talk about small neighborhood streets. We talk about communities who want to keep their places safe for their families and for their children. But I think we should talk about that in the context of traffic easing for businesses as well. Because I think a lot of times if we have a lot of slower traffic, you have people actually checking out which businesses are there, instead of just flying by them. I think in general, traffic is going to be what it's going to be. It'd be great if we could draft traffic policies that basically directed people to Jefferson, Venice, and to the 10 if they're going from west to east. But I think we need to see our city more as a destination, even those of us who use it as a through street, as a through city when we're heading somewhere else. And that way we can encourage more people to stay rather than going around and use other means of traffic because they know so many people know Culver City as a destination that they don't even think about using it as a through city.
Any other thoughts?
We always refer to this as a complex problem. It's actually quite simple. It's just politically unpalatable. The problem is that people don't have the things that they need near them. That's housing policy, and the general plan update will present an opportunity to really talk about that. But obviously, we're not going to have any radical reforms as a result of this meeting. So, what we can do, increasing capacity through the downtown area, I think, will be very bad for your businesses because you're talking about turning what is the most appealing pedestrian commercial area in the whole city into a freeway. And that's not why I moved here. I don't think it's why you placed your businesses in the downtown area. I could be wrong. We can, where we can automate the lights and improve the timing, obviously we need to do that. Where we can improve traffic in rush hour with traffic demand strategies, obviously we do that. But really the future is about making sure that people have their short trips served within walking distance or bikes if they like that, or transit. Because we cannot bulldoze Main Street to get cars through Culver City.
I spoke earlier about low-tech traffic control officer. I already mentioned that. What I didn't mention is the real high-tech stuff. Uber movement. Major cities are starting to use that. Washington, D.C., I believe Cleveland is using it. And essentially what it is it's real-time traffic data. Our traffic engineers do not generally have real-time traffic data. And you start putting that data together, and you start seeing exactly what the trends are and what tweaks can be made. We talk about smart control signals. That's all cool. How about if we had real-time data and we have a traffic engineer that kind of can tweak things, move things along? Again, it's not perfect, but we're using old school stuff, traffic control officer, and we are leveraging technology. That's where we're at. We're in the 21st century. So I am not going to be in a position to say we can't do anything about traffic. We can. We just have to think outside of the box. And so do these traffic engineers.
Thank you. I think as business owners, we're all very excited about the development that's going on around us in downtown. Transformation of Culver Studios, bringing Apple, all the development that's happening. Just in a general way, I'd like each of you to comment about development and about the impacts, both positive, negative, and how you feel about the growth of Culver City. Alex?
I, like most people, live in a house that was built by a developer. I mean, developers build the things that we use. I think that the development that's happening in Culver City it's challenging for people. A lot of people are very attached to the way Culver City was, and a strong city is just never finished. We must always keep evolving to stay solvent, to stay exciting, to stay appealing. So while of course every development needs to be carefully vetted, the general plan, again, I hate to harp on it, but it's going to be a great opportunity to get community buy-in, if we handle it right, to get people on board with where the change is going to happen, so that there's a lot less of the 2-year back and forth with the public, which, not to diminish the importance of that, outreach to neighborhoods and accommodating people's fears over change is critical. I think what is not talked about enough is incremental development. There's a tendency, because of the regulatory environment that we've built sort of haphazardly, to only have either $200 million projects or you're renovating your bathroom. In between those 2 points is where the dynamism of cities for the future really lies. There's just so much potential. Right now, if you wanted to get together with a friend and build something, develop a fourplex, it's not possible anywhere in the Los Angeles area. And that's led to the housing crisis that we have. We need to have conversations about how we can unlock the potential of incremental development. That's how interesting streetscapes are built. That's how a responsive, adaptive city is created, and it's something that we have made sort of impossible presently.
Thanks. Marcus?
Just in the downtown area, we have 3 tower cranes. I've lived here, erected at one time. I've lived here for 20 some odd years. I've never seen that before. When we moved here, the restaurants we had, the go-to restaurants was Sagebrush Cantina and La Bayona, which I love the most, and San Gennaro's. All right. What a difference. When we moved here, the big thing was, were we going to build a movie theater? How many screens should it be? People were against it. But at the end of the day, Ed Walkowitz was right. You build it, they'll come. Paul, you were right too. And they've come. So, but where we are right now is we're in a renaissance period. It is just fantastic. We have the Metro. We have, who would believe we were going to have like we have a boutique hotel, the Pally Hotel, almost done. We have the Ivy Station Hotel, and we have this great Culver Hotel. So on development, one of the things that I'm finding is we have to empower the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods have to be empowered to basically be active when there is a project. Because when that occurs, it's a win-win for everybody. If a project is just rifled through, or there's a neighborhood that is really just silent, things happen where people just get mad. They say, I didn't want this. So I believe, if I'm elected, it's empowering the neighborhood associations. Ones where there are no neighborhood associations, attempting to mentor them with the associations that are already in existence. And I think it is the role of government. We talk about getting people involved. If you have a strong neighborhood association, when there's a development next door, they're going to be at every meeting. They're going to be providing input. And as elected officials, we need to hear that input because we don't live in every meeting.
So when I moved here 15 years ago, I was very reticent to move here. I actually moved here with 2 of my best friends. All I saw downtown at the time was a movie theater, and I wasn't really sure if this is where I wanted to be. I have grown to enjoy and actually go out in Culver City. I would joke with my friends, actually go out on the west side, which is not a lot of things not a thing that young people do sometimes. And I've appreciated like everything that's come to Culver City, specifically focused on the downtown area. I am concerned about, though, the difference between development itself and community development. And I think I would define community development as I would probably take a few specific instances in which I think our city government and our city council has done a fantastic job. And I would say those jobs need to transfer to every development. For instance, with the community outreach around the Culver Studios, I think there is a lot of really great neighborhood outreach and involvement. I am one of the people who believes philosophically, if you're a business, particularly if you're in retail, if you're a restaurant, if you sell a business, if you sell a good or a service that people can get again and again, that your best customers are the people who are close by. And the only thing that scares me about some of the development that I've seen is that occasionally I've seen developments that I'm not really sure have been designed with the community and the residents of Culver City in mind. So while I generally think most of the development that's happened downtown is very positive, I want to push the city and I want to push the businesses in the city to really think, hey, my business is this, my business is that. People from around the Los Angeles area will come because I have this, because I have that. But will people in Culver City come? And I think that's very important, not only for the community feeling that the businesses are part of the community and worth saving, but I think it's very important for the long-term health of the business in general.
The city council voted a couple of years ago to add a 1/2 cent sales tax that's specific to Culver City, which is due to sunset in 2022. With all the increased development, increased businesses, et cetera, what is your position on extending the 1/2 cent sales tax?
I'm generally not a fan of sales taxes. They're regressive, and they obviously, this is not a crowd that's in favor of sales taxes probably either. However, we are facing some budget realities that I think make it necessary to start thinking to plan to extend Measure Y. The last year's budget projected structural deficit beginning this fiscal year. I hope that that's that we end up with a rosier projection, but I think we do need to extend Measure Y to maintain the level of service that people expect in Culver City, and that ultimately benefits business owners. I'm cognizant of the fact that we have the highest sales tax in LA County. I think, however, that there's going to be a scramble in coming years, and while we need to stay competitive, most cities have a much higher proportion of their general funds dedicated to police and fire than we do. That's sort of the driver on this, and I think we have a little bit more leeway. We'll start to see our neighboring jurisdictions finding new sources of funds. And ultimately, let's hope that those hotels perform really well while not impacting the Culver Hotels business too much.
Daniel?
So, in terms of Measure Y, personally, I would love, before we made a decision, or anyone who's elected in April makes a decision in terms of the extension of Measure Y, that we actually hear from the community, the business community and the residential community, in terms of whether or not they want it extended. Personally, I think without having another revenue stream that would replace the funds, that the sunsetting of Measure Y would take away, then I don't think we should consider it. I think that would leave a large hole in the budget. But I think if we took a look at the results, the financial results, the returns that the city is getting from all of the new development in, say, 4 years, if we tried to do a budget comparison to see, are we making enough money? Do we still need this? I think that would be a consideration that I think the next city council and possibly the next city council after that should seriously consider. But I think before we have a way to replace that revenue stream, we should keep it in place.
As some of you know, I had major issues with Measure Y when it was voted on. One of the issues I had was, before we go to the voters to ask for more money, if you will, let's be transparent and show what we've done to save money and bring in bring in income other than taxing the residents. Yes, Measure Y is sunsetting in 2022. This is a huge issue. Right now, the council, or the new council, we need to start educating the public about, if Measure Y sunset, what services would be reduced and by how much. Not a general statement, if Measure Y sunsets, your house is going to burn down, your car is going to be stolen, and the police are just not going to come to work. We all know the first responders are going to be there. I'm kind of in a situation personally where I think that we should never assume the voter is always going to agree to be taxed. Even though the voters in Culver City, we always do that, whether it's a school bond, whether it's a measure for this, whether it's a measure for that. Our city's changing. So we need to think and be prepared. Let's say if it didn't pass, what are we really looking at other than the skies falling down? For those those comments I just made, with this $9 million that if we lost, we'd be in a world of hurt. So because of that, I would say I would support it. However, the caveat is the government needs to adequately and effectively explain, if we don't do this, what will be lost.
As you all know, restaurants have played a large part the last 10 years or so in the rebirth of downtown. And one of the largest issues facing the restaurants and other businesses in downtown is the minimum wage. Culver City has agreed to essentially go with the state. Whatever the state does, Culver City does. Other municipalities like LA City have raised the minimum wage dramatically more than the state demands. What is your feeling about minimum wage raises and how that might impact downtown? Marcus, I'll go with you.
I'm against the city creating a minimum wage that's higher than what's mandated by state. I was very succinct. I'm now waffling. I said it before. I'll say it again. One reason is this. We have a lot of restaurants in downtown Culver City. We had restaurants that were here one day and then were gone in 8 months. We had other businesses like that. So I am concerned if, as a city, we force a higher minimum wage that's mandated than what is mandated, it could hurt some of the existing restaurants as far as being able to survive. As a bankruptcy lawyer, I've dealt with restaurants, I've dealt with small businesses, medium businesses. Payroll is usually the highest expense depending on the industry itself. So I want the businesses to succeed, but I don't want to place an extra burden by adding an increase in the minimum wage to support the higher minimum wage.
Dana?
Sure. I think some of you may remember I had a very specific opinion around this 2 years ago. At the time, the state had not put in their minimum wage timeline, and I said that I was fully supportive of $15 minimum wage. That hasn't changed. I am fully supportive of it. I think in terms of the timeline, which is more what you're talking about, because I think both LA County and the state have timelines to get to $15 an hour.
Right.
I would be open to discussion in terms of figuring out whether or not Culver City should adhere to the state's timeline or make their own. But I do think the minimum wage should be raised to $15 an hour. Frankly, I come from a union background. I don't think $15 an hour is enough, personally. But I would be open to looking at the timelines and comparing them and trying to see if there is a detrimental impact on businesses in Culver City, and if there is some way that we can adjust our timeline to alleviate that.
I think the state's timeline works. I think we should stick with it. This is sort of the wrong question, though. It's another instance where a complicated problem is really simple. In our area, the #1 driver of poverty is housing costs. So the real hard discussion, and one I want to have in the general plan context, is how do we address the dramatic undersupply of housing? It's a transportation issue, it's a poverty issue, it's a pollution issue. It's really at the center of most of California's problems. I think that this, the pace that we get to $15 an hour is second fiddle to how do we address the tremendous housing-driven poverty in Los Angeles County.
Well, one more point about the minimum wage, which California is one of only 7 states in the union that doesn't have a bifurcated minimum wage for tipped workers and non-tipped workers. And there's no such thing in California since 1976 as a tip credit, meaning if you paid $8 an hour and your tips go to 15, then essentially you've met the minimum wage. One of the things that the restaurant associations are fighting for in Sacramento is to go back to having a tip credit, which would bring tipped workers to at least a minimum wage, and if it doesn't, then the employer would have to pay to $15. How do you all feel about that? Marcus? And the reason why I ask is that I think that there's sometimes a non-nuanced view of issues like the minimum wage by politicians. And I've had this discussion with our state assemblymen and all that, and I think there's not a true understanding of it. That's why I bring that up.
What did the assemblyman say?
Well, we're going to have question and answer after this.
May I ask you a question?
Go right ahead.
The state recognizes tips as taxable from the employer's perspective. They take employer taxes out of the tips, but from payroll, they don't recognize it as salary and therefore want the minimum wage increased. What's your take on that dichotomy?
I'm smiling because it's very, very interesting, and I would need to speak to the Restaurant Association members to get their view, speak to the workers, organizations, unions to get their view, and try to reach a balance. It doesn't. What Nihal mentioned, that doesn't make sense if you tax on the tips, but it doesn't count. The tips doesn't account for a minimum for the wage itself.
Right.
It's kind of counterintuitive. So I would look more into it, get the parties together, and try to find a solution that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, me.
Well, obviously you're talking about state tax law, so this is not within the purview of city council. It's always trouble. Tipping is a strange thing. I obviously tip, but it's odd that we have this sort of a discrimination based on what kind of restaurant a worker is employed at. I think servers and captains at Cut are doing probably a lot better than folks who are working at Denny's. And it strikes me, this is just my opinion as someone with absolutely no authority over this, even if I'm elected, that if the expenses of running a business should be treated as expenses, and if tip is counted as income from your perspective, then it's also a salary that's paid out. So it doesn't. I agree, it does not make sense to tax that and not give you credit for the cost of your running your business.
Daniel?
Very quickly, I think from a business perspective, it makes sense to have tips counted as both income and salary. But since this is out of our purview anyway, I'm just going to give you my actual opinion. I think in America, we need to get away from tipped work. We need to pay people a dedicated wage for the work that they do, a living wage that is not dependent on the opinion of the people that they serve.
Good point. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. We have questions from the audience. Nihal?
Yes, let's see how you look on TV. No, specifically, this is the first forum I've been to, but you've already been together for a couple of other forums. Specifically, what separates you from the other candidates? You've heard sort of their take on, or at least answering questions that have been asked. What separates you, and what is it specifically about you that would make me, the average voter in Culver City, vote for you in this upcoming election?
Good question.
It may surprise some people, my answer, but I think it's really the particularized expertise on the particular moment of the city. I went to UC Berkeley and majored in I apologize for the long name, but it's political economy of industrial societies, and it allowed students the opportunity to focus. It was poli-sci and econ, and allowed students to focus on what they thought about, what they cared about in that area. And I focused on developing, developed country cities, because both the cultural and economic aspects, sort of the general things, and also the technical aspects of what cities do and how they operate. graduated with honors in that major, and then went to UCLA School of Law, where I graduated in the top 10 of my class with an emphasis on corporate finance and the business law program, and spent a number of years in a field of corporate law that really focused on conflict resolution and negotiated outcomes. And now I'm working in the California Attorney General's office doing environmental work. And I think that all of that has really, and I've the entire time, ever since college and my major, had a keen interest in books about planning and about what it is that makes cities function well and increase the shared prosperity that we all get from living together in conglomerations. So I think that those things really tie together. I've been thinking about mobility. I've been an activist for mobility issues. That's one of the big challenges. I've been an advocate for housing. Right now, housing, as you've heard probably more than you care to today. That's why I'm in the Committee on Homelessness. That's a major, major issue throughout the region. We can play our part. There's there's another sales tax issue, $325 million a year in the county available, and I know how to get that money and deploy it to the maximum benefit for the taxpayers and get people housed. So I think that when you tie all that together, it just so happens that my lived experience puts me in a place where I can really be of great service to the country, to the city at this moment, and the country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel? What separates you from the other candidates?
Personally, I think I bring a diversity of experience, but just from a housing perspective, I am the only candidate who is a renter and not a homeowner. But from the diversity of experience perspective, I moved to the Los Angeles County area to pursue a career in entertainment. So a lot of the businesses that are here that are entertainment focused actually have somewhat of a connection to. I was in the Screen Actors Guild for about 10 years. I've also written and directed. I grew up